it takes time to do these really big step changes to it. It's not a sprint, it is an ultra marathon. That's the single biggest learning I've made on the way. And it's about making small compounded gains or wins that over time make huge wins.
Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to the Deal Maker Show. So today we have an amazing guest, joining us. A guest that he's done it a couple of times. We're going to be really walking you through the journey of building, scaling, financing, and then also, when it comes to building a team with different nationalities, also getting ideas, how you get inventors too and scientists on board, as well as developing and proving the technology in different stages, right? So again, brace yourself for a really inspiring conversation. And without further ado, let's welcome our guest today, Patrik Möller. Welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Great to be here, Alejandro.
So born and raised in Sweden, right there close to the border with Denmark. Give us a walk through memory lane. How was life growing up for you?
Yeah, there in southern Sweden, where people from Stockholm, where I live today, would say that I'm from Denmark because of the dialect in southern Sweden. Yeah, a good place to start, I think. A nice dynamic area. And quite, as the Scandinavian places are, quite international today. So a good place to start, I think.
Now, in your case, how did you get the whole, entrepreneurial bug? And were you always like a problem solver growing up?
I think I've always, and even through my dad, etc., always been the kind of person question everything. Is this just because somebody says this is the best way to do it? Is it really the best way to do it? And I think I've always had that kind of thinking, and especially going to school and then university, that has always been one of my things to think, even if it says in a book, does it have to be the only way to do it? And then I studied in UC Berkeley in California. And then I saw more and more of the entrepreneurial activities going on around there. And that was really inspiring to me as well.
How do you find yourself in the US, coming to Berkeley? I mean, how did that come up? I mean, it's quite the long trip from Sweden.
Yeah, that was probably one of my best years ever. So much fun and extremely interesting people. So I got to live in something called the International House in Berkeley, where we were 600 people from essentially all countries of the world. And then, of course, taking classes in chemical engineering that I studied and microfabrication that I specialized in then towards the semiconductor industry. A whole new world opening it up and berserkly also being quite a lot of radical people. I think that resonated with me as well.
Now, for you, obviously at the time when you got going with your first company, I mean, in Europe, especially in Sweden, it's very similar to Spain, where I'm originally from. And it's more like, the culture is different. You don't have the entrepreneurial mindset that maybe you have in the US, especially when you go to places like California. But how was it? How did that whole idea of going at it with starting a company, come through, as opposed to maybe doing the corporate route that maybe I'm sure your parents would have loved for you at the time?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I think my dad always had is like, when I started, even the first years after starting, it's like, yeah, but when aren't you going to apply for jobs sometime? But yeah, I think I had an idea when I started in Berkeley to simplify the way to do semiconductor manufacturing, essentially removing a lot of the process steps in metallization, so the top layers of silicon manufacturing. And when I get back to Sweden, I decided to do it stepwise. So we did a thesis work on it. It became our master thesis. And then we got a proof point for the principle. And then we got quite keen on starting a company around that. And I guess we were quite, young, and everything was possible. Having been a year in California, you were really enriched by the idea that, yes, try, yes, push. And I think that really helped me to just keep pushing on that idea. And it turned out that we ran that for some 10, 11 years, and we built a pretty successful company on it. So, it was worth the try. But I guess the dedication to just continue, I think I just took it stepwise at the time. When you then decided to do your thesis work, then decided to register a company, it was, of course, forming a bold vision. But it took some time to realize that this is going to be a 10-year plus type of venture, etc. I don't think I knew all of that from the beginning.
How was it like to raising money for the first time?
Yeah, so we were quite, I think it's a good thing to start companies where you're coming straight out of university. So I started it together with two other friends from university. And, you have low costs of living at that point, usually in your stage of life. So I think we continue to live on a very low cost in the first years. So that avoided us having to raise substantial amounts of money. We did apply for a lot of soft funding, scholarships, and grants to do the research. And I even enrolled as an industrial PhD student. So half my salary got covered by a PhD support from a research program, etc. So we were quite creative in the early days of not having to raise too much of private capital or venture capital. It took us a few years until we got the first investors into the company.
How much capital did you guys raise for this company?
We raised some 50-60 million for that company.
Was it tough to raise being in Sweden? Because obviously now in Europe there's more access to capital, but back then the startup ecosystem was almost non-existent.
No, exactly. This was 2002. We were supported by an incubator in Stockholm called STING, Stockholm Innovation and Growth. And we were among the first companies. Today it's probably the most successful incubator in Sweden. And it was a very early stage. The ecosystem for VC financing and so was not what it is today. And a lot of the big exits that hadn't happened at that time. So we got some business angels engaged from the beginning, and people who had built companies, operators, and they were very helpful in providing some of their first money, but also their experience, and helped out a lot. And then in some years later, we were able to get some university-related technology investment fund, and later on some of the big names like North Zone and Wellington Capital, etc., came in out of European, North Zone being Swedish or Scandinavian, and Wellington out of Germany.
So let's talk about maneuvering through cycles, through situations, because Lehman hit, and Lehman hit everyone. How was that for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we had the kind of investors in with a very US type mentality, is like, money's not a problem. How can we scale this faster? And we were scaling. We bought a factory in France. We had quite a bit of people on the team, etc. And all by a sudden, Lehman Brothers hit. And we also had a number of strategic investors at that time on the cap table from Silicon Valley, so big machine companies doing machines for semiconductor manufacturing. And the whole idea is that there would be a bidding war between these companies of buying up our technology and our company. And all by a sudden, after Lehman Brothers, of course, money did become a problem. And everybody were slowing down, and cash flow became a challenge. So we downsized a little bit. And then we decided, okay, rather than, we had probably 1 or 2 years of test production remaining before starting to sell in larger volumes. We had a few different manufacturers with our equipment in piloting. And that would require a new round of financing, etc., to take the next 2 years. So the board and together we decided it's better to sell the technology as is, and everybody expected a quite good deal with some of the strategic Silicon Valley companies. But, everything was very sour in the market at that time. And then they didn't really buy it, so we ended up selling it to another outfit in Luxembourg in the end. And I think that taught me also everything about timing. I think it's very healthy to be through some of these cycles. It turned out as well, we had our chairman of the time was a former CTO of one of those companies that was supposedly one of the buyers of our technology. What we didn't know was there was a merger ongoing in the background between that company and the other one that we thought would be competing to buy us. And then month after we sold to the Luxembourg company, it was announced the biggest merger in the history of tool companies there in Silicon Valley. And that was, had we known that, we would have probably waited, because they didn't have bandwidth to buy us at that time. So we sold to somebody else.
Timing is everything. Now, I guess
timing is everything.
Yeah, I guess for you, how was, obviously when you go through a situation like this, 10 years, you end up going through a transaction, perhaps, not the transaction that you guys had envisioned, the mega transaction kind of thing.
Yeah. certainly.
What was the lesson to be learned for you?
Yeah, I think a lesson there is that planning for the long term is important, especially in deep tech, things that take a long time. You are going to be seeing some of these tough cycles in the life of your venture or your project. So having some preparedness for that is probably something I brought with me from that. And as you said, we were shooting for the skies in terms of exits and valuations, and we ended up selling it for nowhere near there. In that, so that's a learning. Probably also that you should not give away too much of your company to VCs too early. If you are a long-term entrepreneur, you want to be able to take quite many steps improving your technology and getting very, if you say, attractive in the financial markets before you invite investors. And that was certainly something we applied much more strongly in the second company that I'm now in.
What about the obviously after this was wrapped up, then you met a clean tech investor, no, and they've played a really pivotal role in your journey, because not only they opened your eyes about a different path that you had envisioned out of the semiconductor type of path, but also they helped you in really finding your other half in business to be able to build what you've built now. So tell us what happened. How did you come up with this investor, and what happened during those conversations?
Yeah, exactly. I just decided at that time to take on another job in the semiconductor industry. And some friend of mine who's a patent lawyer said, there's these guys starting up lots of new exciting technology at the Royal Institute in Stockholm. They're called InnoEnergy. They have tons of money and they are starting new companies. You should go and talk to them. And I said, I don't know. I've just decided for another job. But I went and spoke with them. And then I got introduced to a few different inventors. And one of them was Stig Lundbeck, who was a medical doctor. And he was inspired by the pumping principles of the human heart. And from that, he had his idea for a radically new way to make wave energy technology work. Finally find a way to harvest energy from ocean waves. And the more we dug into that, I must say my initial reactions were lukewarm. Everything I've heard and seen about wave energy were kind of failures, really tough case. And I've just been coming out from a fairly demanding industry, the semiconductor industry, and I thought, I'm not going to do a very, very complicated deep tech startup again. But the more we started digging into it, the more we were checking the physics, we saw that, if these principles can be made to work, we can really change the equation in actually making wave energy both survive the big storms, which had been the major challenge, and then secondly, produce a lot more power compared to the size and the cost of the equipment.
So that got us excited. I guess in this case, once you guys had that idea, how do you go about taking action? Because very complex, idea, obviously.
Yeah, very complex. And the ocean, after sending things into space, probably the ocean is one of the most demanding environments that we find here on Earth. And everything you'd found out there was essentially failures. And any investor who had invested had lost their money, more or less. Not exactly that bleak, but pretty tough environment, let's say. And taking the learnings from my previous journey as well, we decided to, let's go around and speak to everybody who've been doing something in the field. So we went to some of the main knowledge centers. We went to Lisbon, we went to Edinburgh, we went to Trondheim, cities where companies and universities had made the most serious attempts into wave energy so far. And we got to speak with a lot of people who had built knowledge. We heard what had worked and what had not worked. And then we decided on, if we're going to give this a real serious chance, we started to get real conviction about the physics that would underpin a much more competitive solution. We said we should think like the medical industry is doing, like different stages and phases of testing, so that we're trying to find financing to do one stage, and we define those 5 stages to get to an industrial bankable product, clearly. And there was already a number of European initiatives and European projects who actually started defining these stages. And today, the 5-stage process in ocean energy has become a very established methodology. but I think we were among the first companies to adopt it. So we didn't have to invent the whole framework on our own. Other people have, lots of smart people had started to think along those ways. But from a financing perspective, we were probably the first ones to adopt, saying, okay, we're now going to go out and finance, let's say, 3-4 people to do stage one, this small boy size tank testing benchtop prototypes. It's going to cost us this much money, a few $100K. And with those tests, we're going to prove this and this and this metric, like energy per force, energy per ton, like proxies for cost efficiency in volume productions once you start scaling equipment to volume. And we went out and then we completed the first stage with really good results. And based on that, we can get more investments in, we could grow the team, etc. And we can do a second stage. And then in the third stage, we scaled up to maybe 40 people. And we did a half-scale machine that we actually installed in the ocean for the first time. We went to the Orkney Islands in northern Scotland and got that one installed. And up until that, we were able to do it with essentially without inviting VCs. We had InnoEnergy, which is some quasi-equity. They support you, but they take a little bit of ownership for it. But then we were extremely active on applying for European grants, Swedish grants, all kinds of research grants that you could find. So we did between 2012 and 2018, 3 stages of product demonstration up until proven the whole technology in the ocean without inviting VCs. And then at that time, we felt now we're ready. Now we have maybe, let's say, a little bit more than 5 years to an actual commercial product, 5 to 10. We have also clarity and proof points. So now we invited the first investors who became EIT Greentech, a state-run Swedish green tech fund, and Midrock, an infrastructure company with a VC arm. And then a year later in our A round, we were able to invite SEB Greentech, one of the major banks in the Nordics and their green tech fund.
And quick question there, I guess, for the people that are listening to get it, what ended up being the business model of CorPower? How do you guys make money?
So CorPower Ocean, we are a wave energy OEM. So we are offering our technology as what we call core pack clusters. So we work with our customers who are utility companies and project developers. We support them during project development of wave farm projects. And then at the time we get to financial close with customer projects, typically run as SPVs, then we manufacture and supply the equipment to them. We help them install it. So we work with marine operators with vessels to install the equipment offshore. And then during operations, typically a 20-year plus operational period of a farm, we offer the customers to operate and maintain the technology for them. So they are essentially asset owners, and we are operating the equipment for them. And by that, we also can guarantee the availability and the performance of the technology.
So, I mean, for you guys, you were alluding to it. I mean, you guys now have raised 130 million for the Topco company, CorPower Ocean, as you were mentioning, and then also 79 million for other projects. Walk us through how has been now the experience of raising money for this company, because now you did have the experience, going into this of having raised before. So how has it been the journey now, doing it again?
Let's say when we did our stage 4 financing, there where we had proof point from the half scale back in 2020, 2021, things were really good. The clean tech market was booming in 21, so we can raise that money quite easily to then do our first full scale proof point, which was the 4th stage in our plan. So we raised some 20 million of total financing for that, or in equity, and then we topped that up with more of non-dilutive. So that went pretty well. And then we have then reached proof point on commercial scale kit. We've survived 18.5-meter storms in Portugal, and we're powering the Portuguese grid with our equipment. So now we're not going to scale to any bigger machines. Now it's doing more and more of the same, do cost down and really industrialize, stabilize the technology. And for that, we raised a B round, which we closed in October last year, 32 million B round. And this was led by NordicNinja. So it's a London-based investor with primarily Japanese LPs investing in Nordic clean tech companies. That's the NordicNinja name. And we also had Santander joining the round, SEB Greentech and InnoEnergy again. We had Cisco coming in as a strategic investor for the case of powering data centers with 24/7 clean electricity, and a strong Portuguese VC as well, Iberis Capital. So 32 million we raised last year. And I would say the markets probably are and continue to be this year in the toughest so far that we have seen since 2012 when we started. So we are very happy that we were able to do that close last year. And since then, we've also been able to win something called EIC financing from Europe, 17.5 million euros we secured in January. And one out of the two project financing grants that we've secured from the Innovation Fund is also coming in here in this period. So this year we are out, we're going to be closing up to, let's say, up to 20 million in a second close. And we have a few industrial investors who know the space well, who will be joining us, and a few financial ones. But I guess it's fair to say that everybody have to work extremely hard and spend a lot of time in the current market to raise funds for ambitious deep tech, clean tech companies. It's rough out there.
Now, in this case for you, what has been to the, because I mean, when it comes to people, we're talking about people too, investors, no? I want to talk about employees. You guys have been very intentional about the diversity and the nationalities that you guys have. I think that you have something like 23 nationalities, there in the company. So why did you guys have that, being so intentional about diversity and nationalities and different lenses? I mean, where did that come from?
I guess it's been intentional of primarily just finding the best people. So we haven't been extremely intentional that we want many different nationalities, etc. But in the search for the very best brains and the very best experiences to complement those brains, we have really gone quite global in our search of people. And due to that, we have been able to attract quite many people from across the world. And many people have relocated either to Sweden or to Portugal or to Norway, where we have our three main offices today. So the 23 nationalities that we currently are was not necessarily by design, but a consequence of it, I would say, is a very dynamic environment where you really bring experiences and cultures in from different places, which I think is extremely healthy for the working environment and just building a strong culture. Wave energy that we're doing, it's really a global opportunity. In Sweden, where we are headquartered, we actually don't have much waves at all. The European market is really the Atlantic coast. So let's say Norway, Scotland, Ireland, France, Spain, Portugal. And in the US, it's the US West Coast primarily, etc. Places where you find people wave surfing. It's a good place to start looking for sites for wave energy. And when going around the world, it's quite useful to have all these different nationalities in the team and different local connections, etc. It's really helpful.
So when we're talking about people too, we're talking about vision, because they're all betting on a vision, right? On the future that you guys are living into. So if you were to go to sleep tonight, Patrik, and you wake up in a world where the vision of CorPower Ocean is fully realized, what does that world look like?
Yeah, we say, of course, wave power, or a world powered by wave energy. And with that, we mean that wave energy is the third largest source of energy on the Earth after wind and solar. And wave energy is taking on that role of providing stability to the energy system. So whether you run a data center, as we mentioned Cisco here, or whether you run a big industry where you need to run 24/7 profiles, you can't just run when it happens to be windy or sunny. Wave energy now comes in as a new tool for the world to essentially fill the gaps and get a clean energy mix that can run 24/7 at the lowest possible cost. So the vision there until 2050 is to be, the third largest energy source in the world. The opportunity is bigger than all the nuclear or all the hydro capacity of the world.
So I've heard you say too that price is very high when you get there, right? What are we talking about?
The value of the whole thing. Yeah, we're talking about here building in wave energy a new Vestas or so. We expect to be able to have 50 billion plus in sales in 2050, employ many tens of thousands of people, and build really a large scale manufacturing industry on this. So, yeah, and that's the industrial and economic value. But also for the world, I think the big challenge now, solar and wind is the cheapest energy sources in the world right now in most places. However, to take us to the next stage where you go from, let's say, 50 to 60% penetration to 70 to 80 to 90, all the way to 100, you need something else to fill out the gaps. Storage is part of the picture, but you also can reach much higher cost efficiency and system efficiency if you can have generation sources that are more complementary already at the stage of generation. So the price there for the world is to be able to leave fossil behind, because right now we are complementing and filling the gaps with fossil primarily.
Absolutely. Now, time machine. I'm going to put you into a time machine, and I'm bringing you back to that moment, early 2000s, where you are now, getting on a plane, going from, finishing and wrapping it up in Berkeley with your idea in the semiconductor space. And you're now on the airplane. And all of a sudden, you're able to have a sit down with that younger self. That younger self that is about to launch a business, the first business. And you're able to give that younger Patrik one piece of advice before launching a business. What would that be and why, given what you know now?
One advice, of course, is that it takes time to do these really big step changes, to add really disruptive technology. But maybe that's an advice I wouldn't want to have. To some extent, if you would know exactly how complicated and long the journey would be, maybe it's almost a bit good to be slightly naive when you start something for the first time, because maybe otherwise you wouldn't have done it. But I think the big advice and the big learning is the structure that you need to be successful. That's the biggest learning I've made. It's what can we call it? A long-term game for long-term people. I think somebody described it to me in a really good way. It's not a sprint, it is an ultra marathon. That's the single biggest learning I've made on the way. And it's about making small, compounded gains or wins that over time make huge wins. Maybe that I didn't have full appreciation for when starting. You thought things could just go much quicker.
Amazing. Well, Patrik, for the people that are listening that would love to reach out and say hi, what is the best way for them to do so?
You can reach me at my email, patrik@corpowerocean.com, or find me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Well, hey, Patrik, thank you so much for being on the Dealmaker Show today. It has been an absolute honor to have you with us.
Really nice to talk with you. And thanks for inviting me.